For nearly 3 years, I've been ringing the alarm bells about foreign interests taking over the Canadian environmentalist movement, using them as cover for their anti-oil and gas propaganda. Just yesterday, I showed you how every single one of the leaders of the protest movement against the Northern Gateway pipeline proposal in BC are paid for by foreign foundations, like the Tides Foundation out of San Francisco and the Rockefeller Brothers Fund out of New York. The ultimate source of many of these funds remains a secret. That's actually the Tides Foundation's specialty. Right on their website, they promise confidentiality for billionaires who wish to make political donations in secret. I've hollered about this for years. I've asked the media party why they don't show any curiosity about it. I've asked why our conservative government doesn't deregister environmental charities that have become hyper-politicized. And yet the problem only gets worse. Well, yesterday, a bombshell, a thunderbolt. I really can't overstate just how big the news is. Yesterday, the head of NATO, Anders Fogh Rasmussen, came out and said that Russia has, quote, engaged actively with environmental NGOs in the West to wage a propaganda war against Western oil and gas companies in order to keep the West dependent on Russia and OPEC for our energy. It's stunning. Here, listen to him for yourself.
Russia, as part of their sophisticated information and disinformation operations, engage actively with so-called non-governmental organizations, environmental organizations working against shale gas, obviously to maintain European dependence on imported Russian gas. That's my interpretation.
It's almost too obvious to even be called news. I mean, of course, Russia, which is becoming more authoritarian every day, becoming more of a police state every day, that uses propaganda against its own people, that shuts down independent news organizations and has dozens of pro-Putin propaganda radio and TV stations and newspapers in its own country. Of course, a regime run by a former KGB agent whose chief source of revenues is selling conflict oil and gas to the West. Of course, their president, Vladimir Putin, who participated in propaganda campaigns against the West during the Cold War, of course he would do so now, especially now that he's in a hot war against the West and Ukraine. I mean, the real news would be if Putin wasn't engaged in propaganda campaigns in the West. That would be weird. That would be a man bites dog story. The news that an anti-Western authoritarian KGB man is using Western agents of disinformation against fracking isn't news. It's old. What is new is that a leader in the West is willing to stand up and say so, bluntly and publicly. Now, this news was treated as huge in Europe, especially in the UK, where fracking is just starting to get a foothold, and anti-fracking activists have been going full tilt. If fracking can catch on in the UK, like it has in Western Canada and across the United States, not only would Britain be energy independent, but it would be an example for other Europeans, and eventually all of Europe could produce its own gas and be free not only of Gazprom's extortionate prices, but from Putin's use of Gazprom to bully the West. I mean, just 4 days ago, Putin turned off the gas pipeline to Ukraine to punish that country in its slow-motion war. If someone is willing to invade you, if someone's willing to illegally turn off your country's pipeline in an act of war, do you really think they might not also engage in propaganda to attack your industrial base too? Isn't that sort of the least of it from a tyrant like Putin? Like I say, huge news story in the UK, across the political spectrum from the right-wing Daily Mail to the left-wing Guardian. It is huge news. It's a return to the Cold War, really, when the Soviets funded anti-industrial labor unions in the UK to make them strike against the British economy, for example. And naturally, this news has been ignored in the Canadian media. When I last checked earlier today, not a single Canadian news source other than The Sun had written about this, other than one item on the Financial Post online. But listen, you watch The Source, so you already know all this stuff, even before the NATO chief made his official remarks. You already know because I showed you that Putin had hired former German Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder to a senior position in the Russian state company Gazprom. His job is simple: keep Germany dependent on Russian conflict gas. If Putin would hire the former Chancellor of Germany, for crying out loud, do you think he wouldn't also hire German environmental groups? It's not just Gazprom, the natural gas bully of Europe. The Saudis have been in panic mode about fracking too, and they specifically name Canada as a concern to their market dominance of oil and gas. Prince Al Walid, a billionaire member of the Saudi royal family, wrote a 14-page letter in Arabic to Saudi Arabia's Minister of Energy. Let me quote just a few passages from it, translated into English. In addition to the many discoveries of oil and gas in the U.S., Canada, and Australia, there are also great discoveries of shale gas, which will lead to a reduction of consumption of our oil. We believe that the threat is inevitably coming from shale gas, which is increased at high rates in the U.S. and Canada. For us, the issue is clear, and it requires swift actions. Swift actions, eh? Like what? Well, they're a dictatorship and a leading global financier of terrorism. I guess we should count ourselves lucky that the Saudis haven't done a 9/11 on us or blown up the oil sands, but they're not shy about threatening us. A couple of years ago, when my little group called Ethical Oil made a TV ad criticizing Saudi Arabia's treatment of women and asking why anyone would buy oil from thugs like that, the Saudi dictatorship, literally, the kingdom of Saudi Arabia itself, hired one of the world's largest law firms called Norton Rose to threaten me with a lawsuit if I didn't stop with these ads. They did most of their threats over the phone to my lawyer, but they were actually stupid enough to put their threat in writing to my own lawyer, threatening to sue me. Here's a copy of that email on the screen. So we know that Russia hates Western oil and gas and tries to stop it with cash to environmentalists and former politicians. We know that the Saudis hate Canadian oil and gas and tries to stop it with threats of lawsuits. We know that Venezuela does the same thing. They own an oil company called Citgo. It's owned by the government there. And here is a letter on Citgo stationery sent to the National Energy Board in Canada demanding that the Northern Gateway pipeline be stopped. I mean, they weren't even pretending to hide their motives. They said they didn't want Canadian oil flooding the market. They actually sent this letter. At least that was out in the open. But Venezuela also funds propaganda too. Here is a tweet from the Venezuelan embassy in Washington, D.C., lamenting the fact that the anti-fracking movie Gasland didn't win an Oscar. As you can see, though, the Venezuelans said it was because a Venezuelan helped make the movie. And if you click the link on their Twitter tweet, it takes you to a page explaining how a Venezuelan employee, a government employee at their state film propaganda agency, helped make that anti-fracking documentary. They're actually bragging about it. Well, how about the OPEC country called the United Arab Emirates? They're in the anti-fracking propaganda business too. That dictatorship owns an investment arm called Image Nation that just happened to invest in a Hollywood movie called Promised Land starring Matt Damon. It was a drama about an unscrupulous American fracking company that lies to people and sets them against each other. It's anti-fracking propaganda, bought and paid for by one of the world's largest oil and gas dictatorships. Matt Damon was only too happy to cash the check. He's one of Hollywood types that we know about. But what about those we don't know about? Those in Hollywood who take money secretly, as the NATO chief says they do in Europe. Well, as we showed you the other week, a group of citizen journalists named Project Veritas posed as a Middle Eastern oil tycoon and his staff, and they met with Hollywood celebrities offering them $9 million to make an anti-fracking movie if they kept the source of the money a secret. They said that they were doing it for competitive reasons to help OPEC. And the Hollywood producers and stars were so excited to do this, unaware that they were being secretly filmed. Here's Mariel Hemingway, an environmental activist, actor Ed Begley Jr., so excited to take OPEC money, so happy to keep it a secret.
Knowing where the money comes from
is only at this table.
This table, that doesn't go farther than this table.
No, absolutely. I would never say that.
Yeah, what a disgrace. I can assure you that the revelations of these two, that video we showed you there, has not hurt their careers in Hollywood one bit. In fact, it probably has helped Hemingway and Begley Jr. Now Gazprom and the Saudis know that if they go to them, they'll be warmly received. Now, OPEC has come to Canada, too. Al Jazeera, the state broadcaster of the dictatorship of Qatar, they actually sent a whole camera crew to tiny Rexton, New Brunswick last year to act as a propaganda arm for the anti-fracking rioters there. While the independent news media like us reported on the crime spree, Al Jazeera acted as their PR agency. You don't believe me? Here, listen to one of the rioters in a homemade video he posted online saying how Al Jazeera is on their side.
Apparently the corporate media, CTV News, has their trucks confiscated. The only people allowed to make any reports are independent media or Al Jazeera and Aboriginal News, APTN.
Of course they love Al Jazeera. Qatar is the world's second largest natural gas country after Russia. Now, so far, all I've shown you is actual countries, actual governments, usually dictatorships, and how they fund anti-fracking and anti-oil sands propaganda in the West. I haven't even told you about the foreign foundations or private individuals who pour anti-oil sands money into Canada from foreign countries, like the Tides Foundation out of San Francisco or the Rockefeller Brothers in New York. I've just told you about the foreign hostile governments. This is huge news, but like I say, other than The Sun and a small web story in the Financial Post, no one else in the country has covered this that I've seen. Hundreds of millions of dollars of anti-oil sands and anti-fracking money has poured into Canada that we know of from foreign foundations. But that's just what's being disclosed by these foundations. Vladimir Putin doesn't disclose what he and his modern version of the KGB does. Why hasn't the CBC or the rest of the media party ever done a story on this? I mean, look at this 5-alarm story the CBC did a few years ago about one of their favorite issues, gun control.
But if you think it only involves Canadians, you would be wrong. A powerful American lobby group has found its way into this.
The NRA isn't just watching the Canadian debate, it's been actively involved in trying to influence the outcome.
Bryant says Canadians need to know the role the NRA has played in the debate.
I think for a lot of people in Canada, if they knew that the NRA was part of the effort to get rid of the gun registry, they would think more about their views.
Are there any laws being broken here?
No, we found no indication that anything illegal is afoot. The real question for Canadians is, are they comfortable with an American lobby group having a role in what's become a very polarized Canadian debate?
Now, I don't know if you noticed it, but if you were paying close attention, you'd see that the NRA actually didn't spend any money in Canada. They didn't campaign in Canada. They have no offices in Canada. They did not lobby in Canada. They just didn't. They just hadn't actually done anything other than monitor the Canadian gun control debate. That story on the CBC went on for some time, but it actually had no proof of any activities. And yet the CBC went nuts. But $100 million of foreign environmentalist money and bombshell revelations of OPEC dictatorships corrupting groups like Greenpeace, and not a single story ever by the CBC, not a single question ever asking an environmentalist in BC who pays them. Yesterday, I asked a bunch of Canadian environmentalists if Gazprom pays their bills. I asked Zipporah Berman, Ben West, Mike Hudima, the Council of Canadians, Kai Nagata. All of them acknowledged taking foreign money from foundations. None of them will disclose from whom or how much. Now, I asked them a simple question. Do you take Russian money? Now, these guys often argue with me on Twitter. They read what I write. Not one of them answered me. Not one of them denied it. If you asked me if I took Russian money or OPEC money or any foreign money at all, I'd write back one word: no. Why didn't they deny it? It's a hell of an accusation from a hell of an authoritative person, the NATO boss. You'd think these people would write back right away saying not true, or no, or you're crazy. They haven't. They've stayed silent. That's weird. But even stranger is that the media party hasn't even bothered to ask them the same question. That's an even bigger disgrace, don't you think? I mean, I know why these anti-oil, anti-fracking activists take foreign money. It puts bread on their table. They make a living out of attacking Canada. But what's the media party's excuse? Don't they make their living reporting the news? Yesterday we showed you the new private members bill introduced by Cheryl Gallant. It's called C-618, the Foreign Lobbyist Transparency Act. It would require any foreign entity to disclose money they spend on lobbying in Canada, including grassroots lobbying of the sort Greenpeace does. Now, obviously, Vladimir Putin doesn't follow the law. He's a former KGB agent. He's invading Ukraine, for crying out loud. He's not going to register with Canada's lobbying commissioner. But maybe Greenpeace and the David Suzuki Foundation and the Sierra Club and the Pembina Institute, maybe they'll comply with this law if it's passed and fess up to who's paying them. Then again, Greenpeace's signature campaign tactic is itself breaking the law, trespass, destruction of property, even piracy on the high seas. And many other groups have declared that they will break Canadian laws to stop the Northern Gateway pipeline. So, yeah, come to think of it, maybe they won't comply with this new bill either. But hey, given the inaction by our own government, given the complicity by the media, maybe Ms. Gallant's private members bill is the best chance Canada has to to stop the foreign war against our jobs and our energy independence.